Hi and welcome to the page. I'm Ken Smith with Ken Smith Gallery, and today with the help of images that are made available through the Library of Congress, Wikipedia, the states of Oklahoma, Kansas, California, and Texas Historical Archives, I am able to bring to you this presentation of the Dust Bowl vehicles. To begin with, I considered each image in this presentation, as long as I could find a visible vehicle or part of one in this image. And just to clarify what a vehicle is, tractors and other farm-related equipment met that qualification. So enjoy this video. The term Dust Bowl was coined in 1935 when an Associated Press reporter named Robert Geiger used the phrase to describe the drought-affected south central United States in the aftermath of horrific dust storms. However, the dust storms actually began nearly a year prior. Historically, the Dust Bowl was a period of multiple dust storms that greatly damaged the ecology and agriculture of the American Great Prairies during the 1930s. A relentless drought and a failure to apply dryland farming methods to prevent widespread wind erosion caused this phenomenon. Over-farming the land by removing the deep-rooted prairie grass and replacing it with fresh crops for harvesting was the contributing factor that man had a part of a combined man-made and natural disaster. The drought came in three waves. First in 1934, second in 1936, and finally 1939 through 1940. But some regions of the High Plains experienced drought conditions for as many as 8 years. As high winds and choking dust swept the region from New Mexico to Nebraska, people and livestock were killed and crops failed across the entire Great Plains region. The Dust Bowl intensified the crushing economic impacts of the Great Depression and drove many farming families on a desperate migration to search for work and better living conditions. The decade of the 1930s is remembered for the poverty of the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl that disseminated the farms of the Midwest, and the greatest American migration of the 20th century that resulted from it. But far too often, the automotive industry and the changes that came from this time frame are sometimes lost in the storm. Ironically, while desperate families were migrating west in hopes of finding work and leaving the Depression and Dust Bowl behind, a select group of automotive designers were still creating luxury cars for the ultra-wealthy. A Duesenberg J Model A car worth between $750,000 and $1 million today was introduced at the New York Auto Salon in 1929 and set a new standard for design and power. Its price tag of nearly $20,000 at that time frame was the equivalent of 2 typical middle-class homes and 24 Model A Fords. Just 8 years later, Duesenberg would file for bankruptcy. In stunning contrast, a 1927 Model T Ford cost $485 new, and a 1929 Model A was slightly more than an additional $100. Between 1930 and 1940, approximately 3.5 million people moved out of the Plain States. In just over a year, over 86,000 people migrated to California alone. This number is more than the number of migrants to that area during the 1849 gold rush. Migrants abandoned farms in Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Texas, Colorado, and New Mexico, but were often generally still referred to as Okies or Arkies or Texies. During the migration, the average price of a gallon of gas was just 10 cents. And while that might seem ridiculously low, especially compared to today, the average pay for a migrant to work the fields in California was 75 cents to $1.25 a day. Can you imagine the quandary one must have faced when they were considering the cost to purchase a tank full of gas? Just to go from the panhandle area of Oklahoma in a Model T or a Model A that might have averaged 15 miles per gallon of fuel. The fuel would have cost an astronomical $7.30 to $10.70 for a tank, depending on your final destination, or nearly 1.5 to 2 weeks worth of wages. And that's not considering other travel expenses or repairs that might have been necessary just to get there. And many of these migrants were not welcomed once they got there. After the Great Depression ended, some migrants moved back to their original states. Many others remained where they had settled, and 1/8 of California's population is of Okie heritage. The entire Dust Bowl, Great Depression, and migration crisis was documented by photographers, musicians, and authors, many hired during the Great Depression by the federal government. For instance, the Farm Security Administration hired numerous photographers to document the crisis. The photographer of Dorothy Lang, as shown in this collection, is as closely associated with American farmers' struggle against the drought and the dust and the depression as one could document. In the depths of the worldwide depression, 1933, some 14 million people in the U.S. were out of work. Many were homeless, drifting aimlessly, often without enough food to eat. In the Midwest and Southwest, drought and dust storms added to the economic havoc. They traveled in old, dilapidated cars and trucks, wandering from place to place to follow the crops. Lang began to photograph these luckless folks, leaving her studio to document the lives in the streets and roads of California. Dorothy Lang roamed the byways with her camera, portraying the extent of the social and economic upheaval of the Depression and the Dust Bowl. Lang developed personal techniques of talking with her subjects while working, putting them at ease and enabling her to document pertinent remarks to accompany the photography. The titles and annotations often reveal personal information about her subjects. The work of independent artists was also influenced by the crisis of the Dust Bowl and the Depression. Author John Steinbeck, borrowing closely from field notes taken by FSA worker and author Sonora Babb, wrote The Grapes of Wrath, about migrant workers and farm families displaced by the Dust Bowl. Babb's own novel about the lives of the migrant workers, titled Whose Names Are Unknown, was written in 1939, but was eclipsed and shelved in response to the success of Steinbeck's work, and it was finally published in 2004. I hope you enjoyed this narrative pictorial of the Dust Bowl vehicles that I was able to put together for you. Remember to give us a like and a subscribe. It's so important to us. It continues to encourage us to bring you content. But most of all, be blessed.